Welcome to the Franchise Business Real Talk podcast. And my guest today is Mr. Patrick Findaro. He is the co-founder with his brother Jack of vettedbiz.com. We'll go into more of what that does here in a moment, but just a little background on Patrick. He did found visafranchise.com back in 2015. Vettedbiz.com came a little bit later, and they have checked out over 7,000 franchises for people. It's a fantastic database. I happen to be a member of it. Patrick and Jack grew up in Washington, D.C., which is always interesting to me. I want to find out a little bit about what that background was like with maybe your parents were academics or diplomats or something like that. Maybe you can go into that. And your backgrounds are very interesting, yours and Jack. Jack was with the parent company of Burger King. I imagine that's where some of the franchising interest came in and expertise. And then you started out with JP Morgan running a credit vehicle down in
exactly. Focus on Latin America, mostly Brazilians.
Brazilian. Okay. All right. It was like 2 billion. It was it's not a small thing.
A lot of loans.
Yeah. And then went to Colby College. I'd like to hear a little bit about that, how you ended up there. And I know that Jack went to Georgetown, I think. So you
Exactly.
stayed on the East Coast and moved your way down to where you currently are sitting. Whew, beautiful Miami Beach, Florida.
Sunny
right?
Miami Beach.
Yeah. Well, we're coming from different things. When I left the hockey rink this morning, it was -3 here. How was your commute to work?
It was an easy walk, 72 degrees, cloudy, but can't complain filming this in December.
Right. Well, good for you. Good for you. So one of the things that Patrick does is has a fantastic podcast, and the amount of and the breadth of people that are on your podcast are truly impressive. I also like the fact that you do like 5 to 7 minute, 5 to 8 minute little rundown summaries on franchise opportunities, and then you'll have full length interviews. Not most recently, but one of the ones that kind of popped out to me is you had the president of the International Franchise Association on. More recently, you had a tax CPA that focuses on franchisees, I should say, helping people get ready. I will tell you, I've been in franchising since 2006 in the Anytime Fitness franchise system. We started our own system, Frenchie's Nails. And I have learned so much from listening to your podcast, and I'm really grateful to have you on the podcast. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. That's incredible hearing from you, given your experience in franchising, and you're one of our upcoming guests too. In the next 3 weeks, we'll have a current franchisee, franchisor, founder, all that Geek Coffee is done. So looking forward to having that episode released as well.
Yeah, that's great. I'm looking forward to that. So Patrick, I know I kind of gave a high level. Did you want to add anything onto your background and what your focus is on right now as we're ending up 2022 and going into 2023?
Growing up in Washington, D.C., both my parents originally from New York, Manhasset out on Long Island, but I think they got a little tired of the hustle and bustle in New York and made their move down to D.C. in the early 30s. Both my parents are involved with government. My dad's a lobbyist, lawyer. So that's kind of the environment I grew up around. I'm not so into politics. I like how Miami's not so political, and whether you're on the right or left, people can be friends and have lively debates, but not take stuff personal. But growing up with my father, he was part of a large law firm, but it was kind of, he eats what he kills, and he had the infrastructure of a larger group, but he was essentially an entrepreneur with his own set of clients. And then my maternal grandfather was a nightclub owner in Manhattan for like 40 years, where he owned a prominent jazz club, Jimmy Ryan's, in Manhattan. There's definitely inspiration from him and then from my father about going out on my own. And I had spent some time in New York City where my parents spent a lot of time in their youth, but it wasn't for me working at JP Morgan and Goliath in the financial sector, and also just in New York. We were talking about sports last time. I love skiing, I love surfing, kite surfing, swimming, and you're out in Denver, we're here in Miami Beach, and that's what we do on the weekends and even after work sometimes. So New York, I kind of get that, and Miami Beach was a good place to be, and made the move 10 years back. And here there's not too many business opportunities. There's a lot of entrepreneurs. So you got to kind of make your own opportunity down here. It's starting to change a little bit, but there's not too many large employers. So it's kind of a great environment for entrepreneurs, as there's a lot of entrepreneurs here. And my brother and I are both part of an entrepreneur organization where there's 260 entrepreneurs that with closely held businesses here in South Florida. So it's a great place to be, South Florida. And that's a little bit more of my background and how I ended up bouncing around the East Coast to settle down in Miami Beach.
Well, it's a great place to end up. Been there on many occasions and had fun, and that lifestyle of active. Last time we spoke, it was a Friday, and I think you were going kite surfing right after that, and that's great. Keeps the fire going for sure. Because speaking of fires, you have so many irons in the fire. I gotta say, I'm not just pumping your tires here or anything like that, but in all these interviews that I listen to, with you, I am really, really impressed and quite frankly, a little bit inspired by how well you can know different industries within franchising. Like, you were talking to a Midas owner, and then you were talking to a Wawa franchisee, and then you were talking to a home healthcare, and then fitness. And I happen to know fitness, and I know beauty, and I've heard you interview people in beauty as well. I know you have a team that helps you out, but it's not just you reiterating something that someone put on your desk or something. Like, you have a really broad general knowledge of franchising. And franchising, as you know, is a different animal. It's a different vehicle, distribution model, whatever you'd like to call it. But and I was guessing that maybe it was Jack's involvement with the parent company of Burger King, but what got you so focused on franchising, which, as we sit here, we both love the model. We've seen it change people's lives. We want it to continue. But what initially got you into it and said, like, let's focus on this?
Yeah, no. So Jack, heavy influence. He graduated Georgetown and then worked in their leadership development program at Restaurant Brands International. At the time, they had Burger King and Tim Hortons. They've since acquired Popeyes and Firehouse Subs. And then before we co-founded our first venture together, Visa franchise, I worked at a fund that would lend money to multi-unit franchisees. So I already had some experience in franchising before we jumped all in. Whatever industry you're in, the economics of how the franchisee makes money and how the franchisor makes money are largely the same. And obviously there are some differences, like with Chick-fil-A, where the operator gets 50% of the operating profit, and then the Cathy family who owns Chick-fil-A earns the other 50% of the operating profit. But most of the time there's a royalty fee collected, and that serves as a primary source of income for the franchisor. And after cost of goods sold, labor costs, and a few other costs, these businesses are all kind of the same, and they have similar P&Ls. And some industries have a higher profit margin, some have lower profit margins, but do like crazy volume. And if I wasn't like truly interested in it, I would have definitely burnt out by now. But I'm very curious about how people make money and these different business models and studying what the most successful ones are in franchising.
Right. Yeah. And so, the Chick-fil-A model is completely different than any other one for sure. It's usually royalties and ad funds and tech fees and things like that drive the franchisor revenues top line. But, it is interesting how this same model, so many things can fit inside of it, right? From painting companies to fast food, quick service and everything in between. And it just works. And I think one of the things that helps that is, you had Matt Haller on the other day, from the IFA, the International Franchise Association. And when we first got involved with that, I just thought it was a trade group, kind of like IRSA is for fitness, the International Health and Racket Sports Association. But I didn't realize how important the IFA is. So I got a lot out of that interview with Matt. He was here for an event, and I went to that a few months ago. Yeah, it's interesting. And maybe you could speak to this as one of the things that when we got into Anytime Fitness, we bought in 2006 and started building clubs here in Colorado in 2007. I was amazed at the collaborative nature of franchising, not just even within a system, but between systems that are competitors, right? And I continue to be amazed by it, even 2022, I can't do the math real quick, but I'm sure you can, a lot of years later, that people are more willing to share information, knowledge. Everybody wants everybody to win in this. And I don't think that's normal. Like when I was first going to Anytime Fitness conferences, one of the founders, he did warn me. He's like, sometimes the people that talk the most have the least actual knowledge to share. So you want to find out how someone's performing before you take their advice, right?
Exactly.
And then, so I sought those people out and got, just in conversations, we'd be at a conference and I got more out of the hallway talk or sitting in the back of the room chatting with somebody that was a great performer, an operator, than sometimes the person speaking up front, right? And have you found that to be the case with all of your guests? Because I think you have almost 400 interviews or episodes, right?
Yeah, so we've done, I don't know, probably like 100 interviews with franchisees, franchise founders, presidents, and then we have kind of the daily franchise analyses. But I do find that people are pretty open to sharing, and a big part is franchises are regulated by the FTC, and 59% of franchise brands do disclose financial performance on their franchisees. So it's kind of already out there. And the fact that the financials are already out there for so many brands, and you can see in item 21 how the franchisor is doing financially, income statement, balance sheet, and then item 19, how franchisees are doing financially. And even if they don't disclose like the profit margin, you can make some assumptions. And it's like, if it's a fast casual restaurant, maybe 18% profit margin, it's not going to be 40% profit margin. So you can run some assumptions. And with that, it's out in the open, and people, whether you're a franchisee or a franchise brand, you want to figure out how you can improve upon those numbers. So if anyone can get you to get you the knowledge you need and the systems, technology, et cetera, to approve upon the base you already have, I think a lot of people are open to that. And the fact that you've already started sharing, people can then share their own experiences. But if you don't share anything, it's hard to know if the person's doing top line revenue of $1 million or 3 million or 10 million or dramatically less. You have no kind of context to go off of. And the business issues that you might have as a franchisee operating 5 locations and it's a $4 million revenue type operation versus someone with 1 location and it's just doing 300K in revenue, the problems you have are going to be very, very different. And if the people you're communicating with have no kind of basis and they're not able to get that information from you or from the franchise disclosure documents, then there's not going to be such a degree of sharing. And I think with this franchise disclosure document and the transparency that's in it, there's a lot more collaboration and sharing because a lot of things are already out in the open.
Yeah. And it's amazing. I have people, I'm sure you have the same, that will say like, I'm sick of being in corporate. I'm going to do something else. Tell me, I know you're in franchise, you do something in franchising. What do you do? And, like a lot of people don't know what an FDD is, or if they get it, they're like, this thing is huge. What am I supposed to look at? There's some good articles in Entrepreneur, like once a year, things like that. But when I went to Vetted Biz, I do know how to get all the FDDs that I'm interested in because I look at our competitors and I look at ours and all these kind of things. But, for a one-stop shop place, the Vetted Biz site, I think you have a 7-day, I'm not trying to sell something for you, but it's a 7-day free trial. Did that a while ago. And then even though we do our own FDD, we're going into FDD renewal season here soon. So I already got the auditor lined up, and getting everything put together for that. That site, if someone is interested, or I also think people that are even in and operating right now, just being 100% in on franchising, just learn everything you can. You're gonna hear about vendors that you don't know about. You're gonna hear about tax practices that you don't know about. You're gonna hear about mindsets from people like that are running a franchise, whether it's a Midas or whether it's a smoothie place, whatever the case may be. I would recommend just diving in, and then if you have more interest, go into Vetted Biz because there's a very reasonable membership level that you can get a ton of information, so you can scratch your itch. Like you want to know, and you want to be known as the person in your area, whether you're running a hair salon or a quick service restaurant. You want to be the one that people can go to and say like, what about this? Or, that. You want to be the guy or the gal, right? For sure. And so you can do that easily with the right resources and not spend a ton of time. And so
And
You
we
know, I
see
just,
that because we have quite a few members that are franchisees, and then they're also franchise brokers part time.
hmm,
So they become that kind of member in their community where people go to them for franchise advice and they talk about their own case, but then they can also help and offer 500 plus different franchise opportunities for those that might want to get into franchising. And time again, we see people get into franchising, whether it's at the franchisor or franchisee level, and then they have investments at the franchisor level or franchisee level with a minority partner or majority partner. And, if you look at your career spanning 30, 40, 50 years, the average hold time for a franchise is like 7 or 8 years. So you're probably not going to stay in that franchise forever, and you might stay within the franchise ecosystem. There's a good chance, and it's good to kind of keep your eyes open to what's out there in terms of other opportunities, as well as is it right to expand and open that second location, third location of your given concept, or is the opportunities somewhere else in some other industry?
yeah, because you're probably going to, you gain a specific set of knowledge being in the franchise industry. And if you're in it, if you've already purchased a franchise, you're in it. Like, I talk about a zero options mentality. Like once you're in, it's small business and a lot of people are coming at it from a corporate perspective or something like that. And it can get a little bit overwhelming. Well, I could solve this problem if I didn't have these two other problems that cropped up today. Like in my daily notes, I have my power list of 5 things that I have to get done that day, like big things that'll move me forward. And I have a section at the bottom. It's called fighting, because there's always something that I will be fighting today, whether it's an employee, situation, or, hey, there's a deadline coming up. I'm fighting that deadline. There's no names on the fighting. I'm not fighting anybody personally, thankfully. But there's battles every day in small business, and you got to overcome them. And
And it's
sometimes,
like you got to decide if it's worth it. I mean, I get contacted all the time, like I don't know, at least twice a week, friends of friends, former colleagues. Should I go into franchising? And it's not for the faint of heart owning and operating a small business. Many of the entrepreneurs I meet, whether they're in the franchise ecosystem or not, like they couldn't really cut it at something else. And like that's me, for example. Like I could not be a managing director at JP Morgan. I did not have that drive to escalate up. I wasn't the best credit analyst, and entrepreneurship, it was kind of what I had to do. That was the option for me. Where if you're in a career and you're making 300K a year selling medical devices or selling software, it can seem appealing that the grass is always greener on the other side, and just understand what you're going into, and it can be worth it, but the options are going to be less once you start making 300K a year. There's not going to be as many franchise opportunities that can hit that income potential. And it's okay, are you okay with a little less income, but now you're building an asset where in 10 years from now you could have a really nice capital gain, and you've just built up this business and you're getting paid out on the back end. So I think that's a lot of things that people don't consider, and don't just rush into small business ownership because it's not a 9 to 5. And I think at least the first 2 years, if you're doing a ground up business, like weekends, you're going to be working, not the whole weekend, but Saturday mornings, you're probably going to be allocated to work.
right. And, it might have been in one of your interviews. Someone summed it up. I think you summed it up really well, is, a lot of people go into franchising. It may not be, especially for the first year or two, as financially rewarding as if you had a big corporate job or something like that. But you do gain an element of control and freedom, in terms of schedule and time. I remember when we first started with Anytime Fitness, they would say, it's not absentee owned, but you can go to all your kids' games. You can go do this. You can do the things that are important to you, and then come back to the business. And what we say to our franchisees is it's not absentee owned for sure. It's semi, eventually. But the first 6 to 12 months, it's not. It's all in. You're learning.
You got to set the foundation, the culture, the key hires.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's something I know we're kind of bumping up on time here sometime soon, but one of the things that I found on your bio for your companies was your 3 core values. And I found those really interesting because they are not just one word nouns like integrity or, respect or anything like that. And I just want to go through those and see if you could just touch on them really quickly, because I want to really focus on one of them, if you don't mind. So the number 1 was empower better decisions through quality data. I'm going to come back to that one because that's one of the keys. Number 2 is continuously seek intellectual and cultural knowledge. Particularly important is you have a lot of international business, you have an international team, things like that.
We have 35 employees. Between all the employees, it's like 7 different languages.
Yeah, I saw that. That was pretty amazing. And then number 3, take extreme ownership, which is, I just love that one because it just makes so much sense, even though it hurts sometimes, right? But going back to empower better decisions through quality data. And the reason I ask this is because, a lot of our audiences, are franchisees, franchise owners that are growing the business. We're trying to grow the business, growing the profit, the bottom line. And sometimes what I found is people are so busy putting out the fires day to day, recovering, waiting for the next, shoe to drop that day, like what's going to happen, that they're not taking the time to study the numbers. Because it seems like an esoteric exercise. Like, well, how does that relate to Lisa just called in and I don't have someone to run the front desk right now, right? So could you talk about that? Because I know both your and Jack's background is very financially based, but you're also entrepreneurs and you've got a lot of things going. So how do you do that? And how do you prioritize that? Like even on a daily basis and organizational wise?
Talking about our own organization, there's daily metrics that we're tracking, whether it's lead generation, website performance, customer complaints for Vetted Biz, or even suggestions to the website. So there's metrics that we're tracking daily, and then there's weekly. So it could be YouTube views, it could be website visitors, how folks are moving through the customer journey. And then there's also metrics that we track monthly. And monthly is when we're looking at the P&L, but daily, weekly, we're tracking the leading indicators that will make an impact on the P&L. So we want to track, how business is doing, top line revenue, gross profit, operating income. Those are results where if we're hitting the key metrics, the leading indicators right, that the money will follow. So if someone's running a business and doesn't understand really the key few metrics that are driving their financial wealth, then that's a huge issue. And you got to lean on the franchise brand as well as other franchisees, because most franchise systems, someone's figured it out what the most important metrics are. And probably the most successful franchisees have just a few metrics that they're really focused on daily, weekly. And then, monthly basis, there's a lot more. And then they could always dive in further to the data. But having daily, weekly metrics that drive the conversations that we have as a team and the decisions that we make on a daily basis or strategic basis are fundamental for growing the business and improving my own knowledge base and what I can offer to my peers, customers, vendors, et cetera.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great summary, and it kind of highlights the importance. You're spending a fair amount of time on your numbers and you understand them, which is huge because that's how you drive the business. If you're not getting the results that you want, you got to change something up.
And you can spot holes. So we have 80 different marketing metrics we're tracking weekly. And we saw that the number of posts on the Facebook Shorts or Instagram Shorts was down, and someone just forgot to post those, but we caught that and it didn't carry on for a month. When you're running so many different things, and our content team's about 10 members now, things can slip through the cracks. And ideally you want to catch them hours or daily, obviously the most urgent things, but at least, after 5 days, 7 days, you need to be catching if things are not happening. And if they're not happening, is it something, why is it not happening? And then going back to our standard operating procedure, the SOP, and we're using Tranual to kind of store all of those and say, okay, is this something that needs to be better built into the process?
Right. Okay. Yeah. The journey is not a straight line. It's a zigzag, and it's constant adjustments. And if you haven't made some operational adjustments in the last week, you're probably missing something, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Just one last question, if you don't mind. In your experience with franchisees, in particular to, every business starts and you have to have an exit plan, and I say zero options mentality, that you started out, maybe it's not a rocket ship to profitability and you need to fight through some things.
People have to grind it for 18 months, 24 months.
Yeah.
And then you can start lifting up your head and thinking about, other things.
Right. Then you have some altitude and you can, and things that you can do. But have you seen, what I like to do is look at the end game and say, like, what would my business sell for right now?
Exactly.
And
So
there's
people
tons of,
track every other asset. Why not track the value of your most expensive asset? Maybe your house, but thankfully for a lot of us entrepreneurs, it is not the house, it is the actual business or one of your businesses. And for us, I know that value weekly. And if you own a business, you should have a pretty good idea of what businesses like yours are selling for. And if they're not selling for a high multiple and not meeting your expectations, how can you put systems in place? How can you expand the top line revenue, decrease expenses so that the asset value that could potentially be your retirement meets your objectives? And we've seen a lot with certain franchises where super reliant on the owner, and if someone's looking to buy a business and the owner is working 60, 70 hours a week, the multiple on that business is going to be very low, maybe 2x. But if the owner's, he's working on business development, really growing top line revenue, but the operations of the business are self-sustaining with the key employees 4, 5, 6 times the earnings, that's a highly sought after business where the owner is more focused on continuing the growth. But if he slowed down, the growth would still be there, not at the same rate, but it's not a business that relies on the owner, and the value of that business is going to go way up. So whether that's a franchise or an independent business, if you don't have a good idea of what businesses in your franchise system are selling for, I do encourage people to talk to franchisees or visit Vetted Biz, where we're adding a resale value. By the time this podcast released, you'll be able to see the estimated resale value of over 1,000 franchises.
That's going to be a huge tool for people to use, because what I found is there could be anomalies. Someone sells for a huge multiple for, whatever reason, or they say they sold for a huge multiple. You can't always, to be honest, you can't always believe what people say. Like they're,
Definitely. Yeah, we draw data from a variety of sources, including, SBA banks that are reporting on the underwriting criteria. And I like to look at the median much more than the mean, because you have some guy that maybe sold 10 Anytime Fitnesses for a really nice multiple, and that's going to bring up the valuation for the whole system. But most people are maybe not selling it for such a big price.
Right. And it also depends on, the motivation to sell. Like if you're trending down and things aren't looking great, like that's not great. That's why I say the zero options mentality. Like there is no option. You have to make this work, right? So make it work, because that's going to make your exit when you want to exit. That's really good to know. And in the beginning, when there's, it's usually a seller, multiple of seller's discretionary income, or, EBITDA, whatever, whichever one you want to say, EBITDA plus some seller add backs. It's a multiple of those. You might not like the answer at first, like when you're first starting out, because there's not a lot of just cash flow to multiply.
But it's like, right? The person's like, well, I invested at $200K. What do you mean it's only worth $50K? The buyer doesn't care what you invested. They care about how much they're going to make from this business.
Right. And if there's a third party lender involved, they're just going to say, like, what's the debt service on this? Can you live on the remainder? This is what we're going to lend on it. Yeah. So I was a preferred vendor in the Anytime Fitness system a long time ago. And I've sold them for really low, less than asset value, and I've sold them for really good multiples. It depends on what's going on. But
what was the difference between the franchisees that sold for really nice multiples and those that barely got their money back, or basically wanted someone to just take over the lease?
That's a good question. I will say this: the common theme was the people that sold for multiples knew their numbers, and the ones that didn't, were just like, I just need to sell memberships. I just need to sell more memberships. It's like, well, that's one part of it, right? But one of the things that I see when people are first starting out, they're hearing about the superstars in the system, right? And they're like, well, I'm not there. Like, I don't want to share my numbers. But those superstars started out somewhere too, right? So it's like, pick their brains. I like to think, in hindsight, the people that have 3, 5, maybe not more than that, pretty much. Like when you're starting out as a single unit, you can't go ask the people that have 20 units how they run their business, because there's 4 different layers in there, and they're looking at different metrics, and they've got different staffing. Like, find the gal or the guy that's kicking butt, They have really good systems in place. It's not just someone that can sell, like when they're in the business, they sell, because it's based on them. And then try to be a good partner with them, like ask them for help, do what they recommend and those kind of things, so you don't have to go up the learning curve yourself in any business, but especially franchising. Like if you feel like you're on an island, you need to talk to the franchisor and you need to talk to the franchisees that are around you and find someone that's not the most talkative probably, but the one that's performing the best. Right.
And I think a lot of people, sadly, there's like a sense of shame where they maybe told all their friends that they're now a franchise owner and they're not doing as well financially. And it's like a vicious cycle where you got to break out of it and you have to actually be okay to share. You don't have to share with your friends, forget them, and you can save your ego. But the people within your franchise system, your accountant, so franchisees, the franchisors, because everyone wants you to succeed. We're in the US, it's definitely a culture of like people get excited when other people are doing well. And especially in a franchise system, people want other franchisees to do well and push you up. But if you're not sharing, they're not sharing their experience.
Right. We had a recent thing here in the Denver market. A gentleman opened up 2 weeks before the COVID shutdown as a fitness center. And we were on the phone with all the other Anytime Fitness owners in Colorado saying like, what can we do to help this guy out? Is there any way? Can we talk to the landlord? All those kind of things. Like everybody wants people to win because let's face it, like if you go into a franchise, you got a lot on the line. And that goes back to the zero options mentality. Like you have your financial future on the line, most cases, for sure. It's a big bet.
And the system's only as strong as like the weakest link. If you have some like weaker franchisees that aren't performing, that's going to bring everyone down. The brand perception, the franchisors then might be focusing their efforts and trying to salvage. So to the extent that franchisees can all elevate together, and maybe some of those poor performers just need to get out of the system and make room for others. But I think that's an added incentive where there is a financial mechanism in place where everyone's doing better and growing. The value of their asset is going to go up. The value of the franchise brand is going to go up, and it helps everyone.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So it goes back to that collaborative nature. There is altruism and there's also self-interest involved, like the good two motivators, right? Well, Patrick, again, you've taught me some things as I listen to your voice and see your face, and I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with me, with the audience. Just the places that people can find you. If they looked you up on LinkedIn, they would just go to that.
Could type in Patrick Findaro, connect with me, follow me on LinkedIn. I produce a lot of content there. Recently wrote a book, as you know, How to Buy a Franchise. So people can put into Amazon How to Buy a Franchise, and that should be the number one option. But part of the thousands of interviews we've had over the last 8 years, of those, over 100 are published, but a lot of them were private interviews. We created this book, and it's a 12-week guide to be a franchise owner. So there's a lot of information there. And then vettedbiz.com. And anyone listening, the first 10 people that reach out to me at patrick@vettedbiz.com will give you a free month access to Vetted Biz. So there's usually a 7-day free trial. We'll give you a month access to the Vetted Biz member. And with that, you get access to the thousands of franchise profiles, also the FDDs you can download for free, and a bunch of other financial metrics as you explore how to grow your franchise, explore how to buy a franchise, sell your franchise. There's a lot of helpful information there.
Perfect. That sounds like a fantastic resource, not just for potential franchisees, but franchisees that are looking at expanding maybe. And also franchisors are like, well, what's Patrick saying with the buyer should look for? Maybe we should make sure that we are that. So
yeah, and then also like franchise development folks, like, because they're bouncing around different firms, and it's like, you don't want to you want to work for a company that's growing and doing the right thing, and the franchisees are making money. If not, you're probably going to be out of work after like 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. So there's a lot of franchise development folks that just for their own career want to know which franchises are on the up and growing and which ones aren't doing as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So plug in to all this knowledge. If you're in franchising in any way, look at Patrick's book, How to Buy a Franchise. It's Patrick Findaro. It's Findaro.
Exactly.
Got to thank you again, Patrick. Thank you so much for our time today.
Appreciate it.
Take good care.